Welcome to the Enlightenment podcast and to our listeners and viewers around the world. At this time when Palestine itself and definitely the people in Gaza and the West Bank are being attacked and erased, we feel that it's very important to have a dialogue about Palestine, to give context to what is going on, which is a context that we find is not always there in legacy media, in fact, very rarely there, and to highlight also, on a positive note, the rich and long and beautiful tradition, culture, and history and art of Palestine, as well as what Palestinians are doing now to enhance the world. Today, we have a wonderfully special guest for us, and we will explore the intersections of art and activism with our dear friend Sandra Watfa, whose art not only captures the essence of artistic expression, but also serves as a very poignant commentary on Palestinian rights and Palestinian history. We'll be sharing some of Sandra's art on the screen during this podcast, which is no good to you if you're listening on Spotify, but if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to see it. And if not, you'll be able to get Sandra's book. We're going to start out with a short recording that Sandra wrote 1 month into the current genocide and that she wrote early in November 2023. Here's that recording now.
They say the darkest moment is just before the dawn breaks. That the bizarre question of whether a European-installed settler colonial apartheid entity serving as Western Empire's foothold in Arabia has a right to exist stands as testament to the degree of pitch darkness the world has been immersed in. It seems that only a genocide in real time has the chance of peeling the world's blinkers off. Those hundreds of thousands marching in solidarity in the four corners of the globe, marches that make apartheid and genocide supporters uncomfortable, makes them sweat and squirm, forever kneeling as they are on the wrong side of history. It seems futile to mention the outrageous numbers of those slaughtered by the Zionist killing machine over the past 7 or so weeks, let alone the past 75 years, and not just in Gaza, but throughout the West Bank, within 48 Palestine, the Syrian Golan Heights, as well as Lebanon. Our hearts are forever breaking, our breaths forever shortened, as we witness and live through the relentless 75 years worth of ongoing dispossession, erasure, and annihilation imposed upon our people, and still our voices are loudly silenced, our spaces glaringly rendered invisible. But know this, be it 75 years or 750 years, abandoned yet unbowed, only fools think we can be defeated, and like kites, contrary winds lift us higher. Ours is a just cause, and we have righteousness beneath our wings. We shall neither kneel nor ever surrender. Long live Palestine.
Sandra, welcome to the Enlightenment podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just give you a quick bio. As you can tell from that beautiful clip, Sandra is a wonderful poet, artist, visual artist, and a passionate advocate for Palestinian rights and social justice. Sandra has always been vocal about the injustices faced by Palestinians, highlighting particularly massacres, atrocities, and human rights violations committed by the settler colony of Israel. She believes in the power of media to expose truth and to challenge dominant narratives. Our aim in this podcast is to engage with Sandra, not just to discuss her artistic journey, but also to contextualize her work, which is so tied up with her art, within the broader political struggles that are facing Palestinians today. Her recent book, Nakba, Palestinians Ongoing Dispossession, is a collection of her artwork.
And I also, Shamim, just wanted to add that I've been friends with Sandra for over 40 years, and she's been doing her amazing advocacy and work for Palestine long before the West or anyone has really thought about and found out about the injustices happening in Palestine.
Yeah. So, Sandra, we finally get to a question. How about this? Let's start first with the Zionist propaganda that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. Surely an example of the power of words being used in perhaps the wrong way. And despite Palestine having, this, of course, this ancient, rich culture and heritage, which you and Hanan know firsthand, please tell us a little bit more and maybe starting with where your family is from Palestine and their diaspora story.
Well, as far as colonialism is concerned, all colonial enterprises have to regurgitate slogans that facilitate and justify their theft of land and resources. The white man has done so under the claim of bringing civilization to barbarians, as in the case of the Belgians in Congo, the French in Algeria, the Dutch in South Africa. Etc., etc. The British in India, etc. Terra nullius was another trope that was used, empty land. So an empty land for a people was the trope. It's basically a soundbite that's divorced from reality to concoct an entity that's devoid of morality. And personally, my late mother, Allah yarhamha, she was born in Haifa. My father was born in Jdeide, a sub-district of the governorate of Akka in Palestine in 1927. He was the eldest of six siblings. They weren't rich. They had olive groves and orange groves, but they had to work hard to till the land and preserve it, and they were content with their lot. But being the eldest son, my father had to work hard. He went to work for the IPC, Iraq Petroleum Company, in order to help finance his younger siblings' education. Now, at the time in May 1948, when the Nakba took place, he was in Kuwait on work, working there. And he heard about what had happened in Palestine. He didn't know where his parents fled, where his family fled. Asked around, eventually putting one and one together, Akka being closest to the Lebanese border, he went to Lebanon directly and searched for them and found them eventually in Ainabel, a village on the border in Lebanon. And from there, hooked up with them, and then they started moving from Ainabel to Nafakhiyeh to Hadas to also Zal'a to Shiyah, all sorts of little places. The refugee journey started from there. So that's basically what happened.
And presumably you could never go home. And
He's never been to Palestine since leaving Kuwait to find his family in Lebanon. And I was born in Lebanon. My parents met in Lebanon. So, yeah.
Mhm. Just like my parents met in Jordan after, again, they were ethnically cleansed from Palestine. But Sandra, and Mama also was born in Haifa, as you know, like your mom, your late mom, Allah yarhamhum both. Sandra, can you tell the audience, how did you get to where you are today with your art? Did you always know that that's what you wanted to do? And just how did you come into it?
I always had an inclination towards creativity. I'm very, very visual. When we left the Lebanon after the civil war started in 75, we left in 76. We went for a year and a half to live in Greece, which was foreign enough. And then we came here. It was like landing on Mars, literally a completely different culture. I didn't speak a word of English. My primary instinct was to express the disparate dispossession that was meted out to us. And so the visuals, painting was a natural progression, a natural medium to do so. I went to City and Guilds of London Art School, got a diploma in painting. It was run by Roger de Grey at the time. He was the president of the Royal Academy. I was very lucky to have been picked out with four others to help the late war artist Leonard Rosenman in a project to paint the ceiling at Lambeth Palace. So this is how my artistic journey started. By the time I got to art college, I could speak English. No, not perfectly. I'm French educated, but I got on.
wow, Um, it's I'm actually learning stuff about you, which is terrible to say after so many years. But so let's go to your arts. You got the City and Guilds. Your art, though, when from what I've seen mostly, is deeply interwoven with your Palestinian identity. So clearly you were not born in Palestine. You did not have the ability to be born in your homeland. Not many people know, though, that Palestine, of course, had a thriving creative scene. Again, it's part of this propaganda. But art, music, poetry were all thriving there back in the day, pre Nakba. And we talked about that in a previous episode. In your art, you explore the Nakba of 1948, the Nakba of 1967, and really all things Palestinian. Can you tell us more about how and why you use your art to respond to and to challenge the discrimination and the exclusion of Palestinians by the Zionist colony?
Yeah. There's been, over the past 2 decades, thousands of books written on Palestine, historical, political, geopolitical, all sorts of aspects written. I didn't want to saddle people who were new to the subject. Believe it or not, after 75 years, there's still ignorance, all-pervading ignorance. So I thought I didn't want to saddle the reader, the learner, with data or with history or with politics or with any kind of information that has to be transmitted through the cerebral cortex. I chose art because art can transcend even the most indelible preconceived ideas and racist tropes. I wanted to reach the public through their hearts rather than through their brain, and hence the self-published book in July 2023. I do other paintings and other drawings, specifically of seascapes, specifically in the Caribbean, but I wanted to focus everything for the struggle in that book, and that's why I focused on it.
And it's a very powerful book, Sandra. And you dedicated it to your great uncle who was assassinated in Akka and Acre in 1948, defending his country, Palestine. Can you tell us a bit more about him and sort of how that came about?
Yeah, my great uncle, Jad'un Khalil Watfa. I draw all my inspiration and strength from him. He is my paternal grandmother's brother, so my father's uncle. He was in the British police force right at the start when the Ottoman Empire was falling. And when he cottoned on to what was actually happening with the usurpers being allowed access into the country and gleaming the double crossing of the British, breaking their promise to when they promised us independence, he left the police force, joined the resistance, became a freedom fighting leader, and he accrued quite a few followers. On May 18th, 1948, the Israeli army got hold of his position and they lobbed a grenade, martyring him there and then. By the way, Akka was the most heavily fortified city in Palestine. They had a lot of problems breaking it because of the wall, the sur, it was very heavily fortified. So what the Zionist terrorists did was to engage in biological warfare. They put typhoid in a well called the Kabri well that fed the aqueduct, the water through which entered the city, and everybody got sick, and that's how the city fell.
Yeah, it's quite well documented, actually.
It is. It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know that. Sandra, going on to, I'm just going to go off piece from where we are, but I wanted to talk about the Scofield Bible, because since we had discussed this with you, or you told us the story at dinner, we've talked about it to so many people, and few people, nobody has any idea how it happened. Can you just tell us, what is the Scofield Bible? How did it come about? And the reason I'm bringing this up is there's a really interesting link between Christian Zionism, which we're seeing particularly in the States, and a huge support for the Zionist colony for that reason, and Jewish Zionism, two different types of Zionism that are now coming together. And the Scofield Bible has a big part to play.
Absolutely. It never ceases to amaze me, the collective ignorance about the Scofield Reference Bible. It's quite incredible because it had a huge global impact on Palestine, on the whole world, actually. Christian evangelism in America is massive. So the Scofield Reference Bible was printed by the Oxford University Press in 1909. It goes down to, it's a bastardized version of the Old Testament, and it's inculcated, embedded with Zionist annotations drawn up by a discredited and Anglican clerk, a Zionist and a rabid anti-Semite called John Nelson Darby. He formed the Brethren Plymouth, who claimed that they had information from God that even the apostles were not privy to. They believed in the delusion that the second coming of the Messiah would mean either the Jews convert to Christianity or they will be damned to eternal damnation in hell. So at the same time, in the 1830s, in America, across the Atlantic, there was a certain Cyrus Scofield, a felon, a polygamist, accused of bribery, embezzlement, and forgery. He cosplayed at being a pastor in Dallas. He then got approached by a Jewish lawyer and got put up into a very famous elitist club called the Lotus Club of New York City. The lawyer was called Samuel Untermeyer. He introduced him into society. And Samuel Untermeyer was an agent for the Rothschild banking dynasty. Scofield then gets sent to London to meet with top executives of the Oxford Publishing House and comes back with a contract to have John Nelson Darby's Zionist notes inculcated into the Christian Bible. Once printed, these Bibles were sent out by the thousands and distributed to churches, big and small, across the US.
And just to be clear, the Samuel Untermeyer, who was the Rothschild's agent, knew that, was this their ultimate agenda, was to get him to get this publishing contract, or they were aware of it and they didn't care?
No, they knew it was all planned. I mean, it's basically very allied with anti-Semitism. They wanted to rid Europe of its Jewish citizens.
Yeah.
Same with Lord Balfour, who wrote up the Aliens Act in 1905. He knew that Jews were fleeing persecution and being subjected to anti-Semitism. And even in Evian in 1938, there was a conference discussing the refugee crisis of the Jews, and not one of the 38 delegates opened their borders. They all agreed that, yes, the Jews should be shipped off somewhere else and not to be seen nor heard.
I'm harping on this point because it is a connection that few people ever make, which is that the rabid anti-Semites of Europe had a lot to do with Christian Zionism, with this, as you say, these people, John Darby or whoever it is, suddenly changing the Bible in a huge way, creating the Scofield Bible, which is now the basis for a lot of Christian fundamentalism, evangelicalism, I should say, in the US. The irony is breathtaking, but it all served the purpose of the Zionists, the Jewish
It is. But it's worth pointing out that at the beginning, Zionism was not the popular movement it is now. Reform, Orthodox, socialists, communists, all sorts of Jews opposed it and blocked the first Zionist Congress, which was supposed to be held in Munich in 1895. It had to be moved to and convened in Basel.
Wow.
And the other point to raise here is that the Zionists considered many countries for their racist project. Palestine was just one of many. They considered Argentina, Uganda, Kenya, Sinai, Alaska, Canada, etc. But they decided at the end to tenuously link the false claim connection between Ashkenazi Jews from Europe to the ancient Hebrews who inhabited the Holy Land for a spell 2,000 years ago, for a short spell, relatively speaking. So that's why Palestine was decided on.
But it was decided.
Sorry, Shamim, were you saying something?
I mean,
No,
that would put
decided.
the sacred connection between the Jews and the Holy Land, the Ashkenazi Jews, completely moot. It would render it completely moot.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the so-called Scofield Bible became the de facto in America and the South with the evangelicals, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then it
I still,
spread everywhere.
it's like fiction, Sandra, but
It
based
is.
on reality,
It
honestly.
is.
It is, yeah.
Unfortunately, we're the victims of that fiction is very real.
That's
And still to this day, for the better part of a century, untold horrors have been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're talking Bible and since Shamim did the tour, your family, like mine, are Christian Palestinians. And again, that's something very few people seem to know about in the West, and they're finding more and more about it. But as we know, Christ was a Palestinian. The first Christians in the world are Palestinian. And yet, we're not seeing support by Christian leadership and churches and so on, as we would have liked to see during the genocide in Gaza and also throughout the Palestinian occupation and struggle. Can you tell us a bit more about why you see this needs to change and how it can really change eventually?
This has a lot to do, again, we're going back to the Scofield Bible, people believing misinformation. It's basically, I mean, political Zionism is white supremacist, disguised as a self-determination. I mean, even the early Zionists were honest about it. But in the 50s and the 60s, colonialism became very passé and very frowned upon.
Mm.
So they changed their tune from a colonial project to one of self-determination or going back to one's home. Just got a quote here from Theodore Herzl,
Mm.
who stated, quote, "The Zionist colony would form a portion of the rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization, as opposed to barbarism. And in 1895, he added, we shall spirit the penniless population across the border. The process of expropriation and the removal must be carried out circumspectly. And the organizations connected with the racist project, they were called the Jewish Colonial Trust, the Jewish Colonial Bank, the Colonization Department, the Jewish National Fund, etc. But now, talk about hiding evil in plain sight. All the Zionists are going on about this is our land and it's the Arabs who are colonizers. I mean, it's just beyond one's imagination, literally hiding lies in plain sight. And it's a lie that's been repeated, courtesy of Western support, diplomatic, strategic, financial. And a lot of people are still gleefully drinking the Kool-Aid. It's quite
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah, they're getting away with it still, which is
Yeah.
really shocking. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I love quoting Herzl and Ben Gurion and all these people because it is, it's literally from the horse's mouth. You can't say, well, what's your source? That was a very clear call to colonialism, which didn't really deny the rights of Palestinians. It obliterated them, if you like. Sandra, my family left South Africa due to apartheid. So, their daily existence and the things they went through are intimately clear to me. And I don't have any doubt that Palestinians live under apartheid and have been living under apartheid from the very start, but many people do. Can you elaborate for us on what you see as Palestinian apartheid examples and how Palestinians do live under siege currently?
It's quite
Even in the part
extraordinary.
that's supposed to be Palestine. Yeah.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary that a huge number of human rights organizations have actually labeled it, but it's quite extraordinary that people actually question it still. 65 etched laws for Palestinians within 48 Palestine, historic Palestine. There is apartheid inculcated in the West Bank, Jewish only roads, apartheid in water, apartheid in the justice system. I mean, it's not even a debate anymore, but you just have to go for a trip or read up and plain sight. In fact, I would say it's a lot worse than it was in South Africa,
Oh, me
given
too.
the length of time that is. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, but just as racist in many ways, and also there's even down to having the system of different residential passes, different license plates. There are areas where you can be and not be. I mean, it's very,
That's right. And the nation state law etched in the Knesset's manifesto, that alone, I mean, of 2018, it's been like this since the start, but it's just unbelievable how people still refuse to believe it.
yeah.
Mm. And even if we go back a bit, most people didn't even realize that the mass killings, the massacres of Palestinians by the Zionist settler colonialists started back in the 1920s and earlier, and it has continued throughout. And as you say in one of your art, The State Was Born of Terror, as a title. Can you discuss that a bit more, Sandra?
Yes, I mean, in the 1880s, Jewish emissaries were sent to begin with from Europe to do a recce. So they were sent to Palestine. They studied and took copious, meticulous, scientifically drawn up notes on the villages, the cities, the families, the number of women as opposed to men, as opposed to children, who owned who, how many lands, how many animals, down to the last detail of which families had a feud with which and which got on with which, the entry points of each village, city, etc. Beyond that, when the influx of the immigration started taking place, courtesy of the facilitation of the British, there were hundreds of terrorist acts committed by the Haganah, Irgun, and Stern gangs, the main principal Zionist groups, and they had subsidiary groups as well. Those were perceived by the British as such, as terrorist acts. But the second that the Zionist entity was given credence at the UN, they suddenly, poof, just like magic, they became military actions. So it's a bit like rehabilitating what's happening in Syria now. Al-Julani, a head chopping a head chopping figure spawned by the West is now being rehabilitated, and he's everybody's talking to him by trimming his beard, putting him in a suit. What next? So this is what happened. One can get a lot of information about this in actually a book called The State of Terror by Thomas Suarez. This was published in 2016, but it's impossible to get hold of. It will set you back, a second-hand copy will set you back just under $5,000. But you can get it on Google on books for £4.99. And also Mr. Suarez has republished the book with this particular information and more in a book called Palestine Hijacked. Also, Palestine Studies in Beirut of 1972 have a lot of information on it. Israel and Israeli terrorism. So, I mean, it's all archived, it's all documented, and it's there for anybody who wishes to delve into, to see how this entity was, from which sadistic marrow it was born.
Yeah, it's always good to have that, have those notes. Yeah, well, God, I can't speak. Those, those pieces of context and pieces of source material to go back to, if you like. So I'm glad you've mentioned those. And for we always like to mention Israeli, some of the new Israelis like Avi Shlaim and Ilan Pappé. I'm not sure where you stand on them, but they themselves have also gone to archives and talked about the terror that's been perpetrated on Palestinians
That's right.
by the colonialist state.
Yeah, yeah.
On that same sort of theme, the administrative detention, which is for me a very nice way to say the brutal treatment of Palestinians in prison, often without charge. That confinement is something that the world is seeing now a little bit more. The abuse, the rape, the torture, the murder of Palestinian detainees and hostages. And it's something that we're seeing these images on the screen now as I'm speaking and as you're speaking, that you explore in your art. Can you tell us a little more about again, why they're there in your art, because they're so visceral, and what you're trying to get across.
Given the length of time these barbarities have taken place, they're still not discussed. It's been normalized. The Israeli judicial system means that there's a systematic policy of arresting Palestinians of all ages, including minors. Solitary confinement is de rigueur. It's very normal. The children are yanked out of their bed at dawn, separated from their parents immediately. They have urine-soaked blindfolds put on their faces, sometimes a sack, urine infested, thrown into the back of a metal tank, a jeep, and then taken deep inside enemy territory, which is merely just one of hundreds of Geneva Convention violations. The cell is 3 by 3 meters, a hole in the ground for the toilet next to the flea-infested thin mattress on the floor. The food has cockroaches in. This is all specifically detailed on purpose. You cannot tell day from night. The walls have jagged surface, so you can't lean on them. Administrative detention, even worse. It's renewable. It's supposedly renewable every 6 months, and often the day before one is supposed to be released, they renew it for another 6 months, which means the family of that prisoner who have had to surmount impossible odds to get to the prison in the first place, to welcome their son or brother or sister or child. So it's collective punishment. It's renewed without evidence, without charge, without trial, and all supposedly on fake, secret evidence. So it's very, very convenient for them to just throw Palestinians into dungeons and throw the key away.
And Sandra, just to clarify, because they're not really prisoners because they haven't been charged under administrative detention. They're more like hostages being taken with no representation, legal representation, with no rights, with no charges, and just thrown to rot for months and sometimes years, as you've mentioned. So it's a very cruel system that we inherited from the British when they were the colonialists and was taken over by the Zionist colonialists.
That's right. It takes a long time for a lawyer to find out where the incarcerated person is. Even if it's a child, they have no idea. The parents have no idea where it is. It's really very, very barbaric. It's medieval torture, basically. And they seem to revel in it. They thrive on it.
Yeah. I think everything we're seeing is quite medieval in the way which brings me actually to Gaza. Let's talk about Gaza. In one of your art, you say Gaza open air poison. And really, until recently, people in the global north and the west did not really know about the conditions of Palestinians, whether it's in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and of course from 48. Can you tell us a bit more about that work that you've done?
You mean the Great March of Return? Is that what you're
No,
referring
the
to?
Gaza open air.
The siege, yes, the siege.
Yeah.
First of all, the first misconception is that Israel vacated Gaza in 2005. That's complete and utter nonsense, because what they did was to step back to take better aim. In fact, they market their weapons as battle tested on the Palestinians. They've been Gazawis have been under a cold counted calorie deficiency since that time, since 2006. Literally, Ari Mekel, I think, he instituted this policy of almost dying, but not quite, on a starvation diet. Very limited stuff is allowed in, and whatever is allowed in, Israel takes 78% of the proceeds in its coffers. So yes, it's occupied, very much so. from the air, the sea, and the land. And every few years, they carry out what they call a euphemistic term for bombing to kingdom come. They call it mowing the lawn, which means, and considering that Gaza's population is 50% children, it's unbelievable. It really is hair-raising. They bomb it to kingdom come, and they test their weapons, and this is how they feel is the correct way to proceed.
Well, any one of us, and any human on Earth would get tired of that and want to protest. There was, as you mentioned, the Great March of Return in Gaza in 2018. What happened with that? What was the background to that, and how did it end up? As it was a peaceful march and demonstration.
The Great March of Return really flummoxed Israel because it's not used to dealing with peaceful movements. So they didn't know what to do. So they defaulted to the reset button of just basically bludgeoning, cold-blooded assassinations, taking shotguns in cold blood. Basically, people in Gaza went to the border. They could literally see their houses. They couldn't touch it. There's an expression in Arabic, "Shimmu laddu." So you can smell it, but you can't touch. It's like so far, so close, and yet so far. It's really heartbreaking. So, I mean, basically, it was a slaughter, shooting fish in a barrel. One soldier boasted that he got 42 knees in one day, literally maiming a whole generation of young children. They assassinated nurses, paramedics, journalists, kids, anybody even waving white flags, all gone. Yeah, that was Israel's answer.
It's just horrific, and we did talk about it in some detail in a previous episode, but people tend to there's also this narrative that somehow the Palestinians are bringing it on themselves by activism, but it's very important to note that a lot of the time this starts as very peaceful activism and is just used as an excuse for more terror.
Sorry, Shamim, just to add one more thing as well. I mean, when we saw October 23 and the rave that was happening just outside of this open air prison, I mean, I just don't understand how anybody in sort of with any humanity would go and have this massive big party knowing that there are people who have been under not only occupation, but under severe calorie restrictions, control, etc., and still think it's okay to go and have this big party just outside where people are brutally treated. But sorry,
Right. I mean, it's the same principle of holding barbecues outside the hunger strikers' prisons, literally. It's all actions born out of the marrow of sadism. This is what they thrive on and depend on. It's a very, very sick society that should have been dismantled by yesterday, basically. And we've seen throughout this latest Holocaust that is still ongoing, through their own admission, TikTok sketches of just really reveling in the suffering they inflict on the Palestinians in Palestine, in Gaza specifically.
Yeah.
It's something else, it really is.
Yeah, no, it's horrific. A lot of the art that we've been seeing now during this podcast on the screen is representative in a way that's quite clear. I wanted to ask you about this one, Sandra, which will be coming up for our readers, but I'm showing you here, which is a little more abstract. And I just wanted to ask you, what is that piece particularly about? What does that art mean?
This is a transcription of Picasso's Guernica, which he executed in 1937. It's perhaps the most famous anti-war painting of all time. It's hanging in Madrid at the moment. I was just dumbfounded by the amount of ignorance. So I wanted to kind of take something that was very obvious to the general public, and I inculcated the motif of the kafiyeh, and I put the key of return in the hand of the victim on the floor, just in another attempt to reach people, and to shed light on it.
Yeah, with an artwork that's so well known in the Western canon, I guess.
Yeah.
So just to go to another subject, Sandra, what does Palestine mean to you? Because I know you explore it in your art, in your activism, in your everyday, but it'd be great to hear it from you.
Well, that alone needs a whole hour of talking, but I'm going to put it very, very succinctly because
Sure.
that's exactly what I believe. Palestine is the litmus test for humanity. If the settler colonial project called Israel succeeds, and it's a huge if because no settler colony ever exists ad infinitum, it will be have a huge repercussions on the entire world, not just on that part of Western Asia. It would mean the dehumanization of an entire people. It would mean that the rule of law, all that has been buried under Ghazi's rubble. And if that precedent is etched in history, it will mean that the same kind of oppression is coming to a place near anybody, anywhere on earth. We're already beginning to see it, the militarization of the police, the silencing of free speech in the West, the withholding of amenities to general public. It's already creeping through, and people are beginning to see, especially the younger generation who haven't been inculcated with indelible indoctrination from in utero, which the Zionists have. Um, the mask has fallen. The mask has finally fallen, and it took an ongoing Holocaust for it to fall. It really is like a boxer who is drunk on power, taking his punches, and he's had many victories in the past, and everybody's applauded him for his career. He's now on one leg. This is the time, carpe diem, to seize the moment to topple that abusive person to the ground, dismantle the settler colony, and just move on from there, because it will have repercussions on the four corners of the globe if this does not happen.
So true. And then I remember a few years back, actually quite a while ago, you told us that in our lifetime, there will be a free Palestine. And you even predicted roughly when that would be. And I couldn't see it for the longest time. I was like, I don't know what Sandra is on about, but I'm actually finally starting to believe it. I've always known about the sumud or the resilience, which is another piece of art that you've done, and how important sumud is for Palestinians and how it's growing stronger despite the heartless cruelty, the genocide of Gaza, the Holocaust, as you say, and the atrocities across Palestine. And the love of the land of Palestinians is eternal, as we know. But so, what are your thoughts on that? I know. Do you still actually believe it? We will see it in our lifetime and soon enough.
I've been saying this for many, many years, and
You
for
have,
many, many years, people look at me like I'm completely crazy.
yeah.
But I do believe it. I do believe it. I've always said, free Palestine, and all these struggles are interconnected across the globe. It's the same powers that are oppressing us, that oppress people, have oppressed people, the indigenous people in Canada, in America, in New Zealand, in Australia. It's the same empirical foot soldiers, so to
Mm,
speak. It's white supremacy
mm,
gone rampant. It's the
yeah.
same thing. I do believe it will be. I mean, we've had a setback with what's happened with Syria. Um, the axis of resistance has taken a blow, but it's not something that you can kill. It's um, it's a belief, it's an ideology, and you cannot kill ideas or beliefs. Somebody once said, uh, you can never douse the flame of the human spirit. As long as there is oppression, there will always be people who are willing to live on their feet rather than die on their knees.
Hmm.
Very beautiful and so true.
Mm.
Because that's
Yeah.
the best of what it is to be human, right? And what we're talking about here with white supremacy, with racism, with this kind of colonialism, it's dehumanization. It relies on dehumanization, in my opinion, for it to work. Because we're saying that these people are somehow less than us. And Palestinians, of course, have been so dehumanized in the West. It's part of the reason that we feel representation is so important. The indifference of Western governments and the legacy media is totally exposed at this point. Yeah, it's hard to imagine tens of thousands of white children anywhere in the world being killed on this scale, and there being no outcry from the governments. But
or Shamim, or even Jewish people being killed at this rate.
100%.
With silence. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. So we see this changing a little bit, tiny bit on legacy media, a lot more on social media, but how do you see it changing longer term, Sandra? And what can people like us, everyday people who are feeling this, but feeling frustrated that it's like on the 17th page of CNN, what can we do about it?
First of all, to go back to the indifference, I don't believe it's indifference that moves Western vassal states and the MSM to whitewash the genocide and propel our dehumanization. I think they are very heavily invested in it. It's the last colonial project in Western Asia, and they defend it tooth and nail. This is what we're seeing. We're up against huge enemy, very all-powerful enemy. They do fight tooth and nail to defend it. And part of that is erasing the narrative, silencing people. You've seen what's been happening on US campuses, all our campuses across Europe, actually. We can't sit there and depend on outside help. Basically, what each person can do is just educate themselves, talk about it, never stop talking about it, boycott, that helps. And that's it. Just keep doing what people do. But the rest of it is up to whoever is denying what is going on. It's between them and the pillow they put their heads on at night. And this is a personal story. It's very ridiculous to have this thing going on, because ultimately I believe we are all connected. On an energetic level, we are all connected. And this goes back to religion. I respect religious people, especially when they have nothing else to get power from, as in the case of Palestinians in Palestine. I personally am not religious. I'm a student of spirituality, because I believe that religion creates dualities. So if I'm this, I'm not this, and the other. But we are all connected. Energetically speaking, we are all connected. Some are the shadow side and some are the light side. Yeah.
Very much agreed. And I think that's, I just want to mention that you said boycotts and education. If people are having trouble, or it feels overwhelming, this podcast is here for that reason. There are many other resources online. And for just go to the BDS Instagram or website to get a quick, clear graphic of the key corporations and companies to avoid.
Exactly.
All possible. All these
Exactly.
things do make a difference. We've seen it making a difference in the last year. But yes, Hanan and I think have very much the same belief. We're not religious, but we believe we're all energetically connected. There's a core humanity, and without that value, life feels like it doesn't mean very much. Artists are very much a target, have been a target in Gaza, the poets of the Israelis for that reason, because art, poetry, film, music, all of these things touch us across humanity without the barriers that politicians and corporations like to put onto us. Do you have any advice for Palestinian artists who may be just getting going, who may be fighting the fight, and for creative people and activists inside and outside Palestine for getting their art seen, their stories heard and appreciated and shared to help change the narrative?
Sadly, there's a lot of fear still prevailing. People are scared to talk because of their career or whatever. It has repercussions on their societies. I've lost so many friends over the past year. Well, people I realize were not actually friends because they've known what I stand for. They've known and suddenly it's just flipped for whatever reason. Less is more. Less is more. Clear your lives of that rubbish. Don't stop talking. Literally, you have to grow a pair of steel balls to keep talking, no matter what, proverbially speaking. No matter what, just keep talking. Whoever you annoy, good on you, annoy them. Just keep doing what you do, basically, regardless of the repercussions, because what's going on in Gaza right now, what's been going on, incremental genocide throughout the whole of Palestine, um, is unconscionable. It really is unconscionable. It should not be happening, not least in the 21st century. It just should not.
Absolutely. And I think also humanizes people. You know, you hear the story of one person in Palestine. It's very much different from hearing a faceless number. Um,
Exactly.
and so I think from that perspective, I would always encourage anybody who's got um, stories about Palestinians in any way, shape, or form to share them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
And
important.
yeah, no, absolutely. And Shamim and I are very big on representation, and we feel that all forms of representation is important, especially Palestine through art, as Shamim said. But why does it resonate more for you, Sandra, in terms of the art that you create and the representation, the importance of it now more than ever? Because in the past, as you said, there are many books written on Palestine, art, etc. But why now, and how can it move and change the hearts and souls of people?
It goes back to the point I made earlier, which is my desire to circumnavigate the brain, which is quite often embedded with the preconceived ideas and prejudices. Um, as I said, we're up against the most formidable enemy. Um, it's subjected to the most powerful motley crew of Western criminals, and who've installed their military outpost on top of Palestine. Despite their financial, strategic, military, high-tech weaponry that they relentlessly send to Israel to annihilate us with, it's very important to realize that we, the Palestinians, have the most powerful weapon of all, and that's the truth. This is the ultimate truth. No amount of money, no amount of tax dollars, no amount of intelligence provided from the British government to carry out the genocide comes even close to that power of the truth, of the history.
Yeah. No, you're right.
That's worth holding on to.
No, you're right. It's quite important. And I used to think in the past that a two-state solution could work. But we know the Zionist colony has always rejected that while pretending they don't want a democratic Greater Israel, i.e., giving Palestinians equal rights. They prefer to continue with their ethnic cleansing and apartheid. But I think the world is now seeing it. And as we said, activism in any form is really important. But we know, and I think more and more people should really understand that Israel is an apartheid regime. It's a Zionist ethno-supremacist, as you said, settler colonial project, Sandra. And I feel now that more than ever that it's one state, equal rights for all from the river to the sea. But we need to have justice, reparation, the right of return of all Palestinians, something my cousin Fadi mentioned last week in the last episode, and including those who were forcefully, if you like, exiled and expelled out of Palestine over 77 years ago now. Because the right of return is recognized under international law, but I feel, and I'd like to know what you think about the solution, but I feel that it's important to stop the genocide immediately, to stop the erasure of Palestinians, the illegal settlements, and basically apartheid, which is a crime against humanity under international law. So I'd love to know your thoughts about solution. Do you have a different
Absolutely.
perspective? Yeah.
I totally agree with you, but as far as the two-state delusion, I've never given it any credence at all. It was just the Oslo process was just formaldehyde, keeping the status, the rotting status, and giving Israel more excuse to expand and annex more land. It goes without saying that the inalienable right of return and the liberation of our homeland will never, ever be negotiable. That's number one. Yes, reparations, restitutions, bringing all who have profited from this aberration to full, abject account, definitely. But essentially, we don't want to recalibrate a settler colony. We do not want to do that. That's pouring petrol on the fire. Nothing short of the total dismantlement of the Zionist entity and the concrete restitution of land and resources to its indigenous owners will yield a semblance of justice. This is very important. Anything short of that is a waste of time. We've seen South Africa ditch its political apartheid, but economically speaking, there is still very much apartheid, and we have to learn from that. We have to literally take a leaf out of that book and avoid that. So we're not seeking equal rights with the criminal settlers. We are turning the whole thing upside down, dismantling it, and giving the indigenous owners recompense, restitution, and everything that they used to own back to them. And what is left is immigrants who call themselves Israelis, settlers. All of them will have to accept that and live with it respectfully, or they can go back to whence their parents or their grandparents emerged from. And that's fine. We've seen the French leave Algeria because they could no longer lord it over the Algerians. 1 million of them left after the revolution. We've seen South Africa, the Afrikaners leave in droves and actually go to Israel because they're so addicted to lording it over and oppressing. So if they're not happy with respecting the indigenous owners of the land and living in harmony and lawfully with them, bye-bye, au revoir, merci.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. No, not arrivederci,
No,
bye-bye.
arrivederci because I come back.
Literally. And this is the only way forward. And one says it like it is. There's no pussyfooting. There's like a better part of a century of untold horrors that are still going on to this very day. So we have to say it exactly in a crystal clear form, exactly what it is. Words are very important. When I put my book together, I approached some 31 publishing houses, and nobody would touch it because of words like Zionist terrorists. They would not touch it. I had to publish it myself at the end because I would not compromise. Same with my drawings, black and white. It's not gray. There's nothing complicated about colonized and colonizer, oppressor and oppressed. It has to be said like it is.
Yeah, but
Flinchingly.
it's been the traditional thing that when you criticize Zionism or colonialism, it gets conflated with anti-Semitism, whereas those are two very different things. And as you say, the irony is the anti-Semitism has stemmed from the European colonialists who encouraged
Absolutely.
Zionists to move out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sandra, what are your current projects and future projects and hopes and dreams? How about that? 3 big questions.
It is. Well, my past goals, my present goals are exactly the same as my future goals will be. Until every grain of soil between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea is liberated, I shall just carry on doing what I've always done. That's my raison d'être, basically.
Fabulous.
And I think also, Sandra, you're so eloquent. I mean, it's hard to imagine that you didn't speak a word of English as we know, and you're French educated and of course Arabic. I really think you should continue with your art and activism, but also to go to universities and schools. And you talked about education. I think you have a very powerful voice through your choice of words, through your art, through your historical knowledge, and so on, to really use that across the world, not only in the UK. But that's my dream for you.
Bless you. I do what I can, and it's not just a duty, but it's an absolute honor to do it. An
Absolutely.
injustice somewhere is an injustice everywhere, and I've always had a penchant for the undertrodden, for the downtrodden, possibly because I identify with
Mm.
being the underdog, as we have been.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people now are identifying with us. And you said indigenous people, including, the settler colonial powers of, as we see, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and so on, because they continued, as we're seeing in Palestine. And I think it's resonated with a lot of people and people with a heart and a soul who are finding out the truth. But Sandra, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered?
Um, I just like to say that to reiterate that now is the time. The mask has fallen. And literally, there should be a new verb in the Oxford Dictionary to do with the word غزة. To
Mm,
غزة means to expose, to shed light on, to uncover, to expose, because it really has exposed the entire world for where they stand, specifically the Western powers, who have literally so curlingly embarrassed themselves with the lack of morals, with the lack of ethics, blindly following this genocidal project, all the while gaslighting us. So now is the time, louder and louder and louder, for everybody to just bring this to the front, the forefront of the collective awareness. It has to stop, and it will stop. But at what cost? We need we need to hasten its ending. We need to hasten its ending because people keep saying 45,000 killed. That's absolute nonsense. As you know, from the Lancet report,
mm,
until last Christmas, 500,000
mm.
were indirectly killed throughout this Holocaust. And as I said, if it doesn't stop there, it's coming to a place near you, wherever you might find yourself on
Yeah.
the face of this earth.
Yeah. Well, Sandra, thank you. I think we both found that incredibly inspiring, and it's been great to hear more about your activism and also see how your art really transcends just the aesthetic to really challenge and critique these deeply, deeply ingrained injustices. I also wanted to say that your insights have, I think, inspired us about the power of art, which we always believe in, to not only reflect back society, but also provoke thought, hopefully, and inspire some change, particularly in contexts as charged as this I don't even want to say conflict. We know what it is, occupation. Sandra's work continues to push those boundaries, and I highly recommend that you look up her book. We're going to put some information in the show notes about where you can follow Sandra and get her work. As we wrap up, make sure please to join us for our next episode. We've had some phenomenal guests on this show. And if you enjoyed our talk, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It makes a big difference to us. With your engagement and your support, our goal with this podcast is to bring our point of view of humanism to as many people as we possibly can in these quite dark times. A huge thank you to Sandra today for your eloquence and your invaluable insights and your continued activism, and really for everything that you do for Palestine, Sandra.
Thank you, Shamim. I always love having a natter with you and Hanan, and thank you for giving me the opportunity here to speak about Palestine.
Are you kidding? Thank you, Sandra. We need more people like you in the world, honestly.
Habibti.
And as always, we believe that stories and representation matter. Stay informed, stay engaged, take action, and in solidarity, see you next time. And thank you, Sandra, again.
Thank you. Thank you.